I woke up to this cacophony laughter, glasses clinking, and some snooty-ass violin concerto. Real weird, 'cause last I checked, I wasn't running a damn wedding factory. I dragged myself to the window, and what I saw almost made me spit out my morning coffee. My barn. My old, hard-working, mind-its-own-business barn. It had been aggressively transformed. White drapes hung everywhere. Fairy lights twinkled like some fairy tale Pinterest board. Rows of chairs were lined up neat as you please, facing an altar and a flower-covered arch. A freaking priest, was adjusting his mic. The whole scene looked like it was ripped from some bridal magazine spread, except for one teensy detail. Nobody had bothered to ask if they could use my damn barn. I threw on my boots and stomped outside, my dog, Buster, trotting beside me, ears perked. He knew dumb shittery was about to go down. First person I locked eyes with was Karen, sporting a hat the size of a small satellite dish and barking orders at the caterers. Everyone knew Karen, self-proclaimed queen bee of the Hoa, the woman who once fined me for parking my truck too aggressively in my own driveway, the woman who turned our quiet neighborhood into a micro-dictatorship of pointless rules and power trips. And now, apparently, she decided my barn was hers for the taking. Karen, I said, my voice dangerously chill. What the actual hell is this? She turned, flashing this fake-ass smile, so polished it could blind you. Oh, Jack, good morning. Isn't it gorgeous? We've really transformed this place, haven't we? We? I asked, stepping forward. I don't recall being part of any we, because if I had been, I would have told you that you're completely out of your damn mind. Karen laughed like I'd told the joke of the century. Oh, don't be so dramatic. It's just a wedding, and it's for my daughter, Tiffany. You remember Tiffany, don't you? I remembered Tiffany. She was the type to throw a full-blown meltdown in the organic produce aisle, because they didn't have the exact brand of kale she wanted. But that wasn't the point. The point was that 100 total strangers were setting up shop on my land, without so much as a freaking text. You didn't ask, I said, my patience wearing thin. Oh, Jack, don't be selfish, Karen said, waving a dismissive hand. This is for the community. We all have to make sacrifices. Sacrifices? I repeated. Karen, you're throwing a full-blown wedding in my barn. Well, technically, it's not really yours, she said, tilting her head. The HOA governs all properties, and this barn falls under. I took a deep breath and clenched my jaw. Karen, I own this barn. I pay taxes on this barn. The Hoa does not own my land. She scoffed. Oh, don't be ridiculous. Besides, it's already set up. What do you want me to do? Cancel my daughter's wedding? Do you know how much this cost? I looked around at the decorators putting on the final touches. The caterers setting up fancy little appetizers. The guests already arriving in expensive suits and designer dresses. Karen had planned this for months, and she'd never, not once, thought she needed my permission. I want you to pack it all up and leave, I said firmly. Karen gasped like I'd just announced I was going to kick a puppy. Jack, be reasonable. It's just one day. One beautiful, magical day. You don't even use this barn for anything important. I narrowed my eyes. I use it to store hay, and also my bulls. Karen gave a light, airy laugh. Oh, don't worry. We moved all that stuff out this morning. Everything's in your field. I turned my head toward the pasture, and sure enough, my neatly stacked hay bales were tossed across the field, like someone had played a game of Jenga with them. My toolboxes were left open, some of my equipment exposed to the morning sun. But what really caught my attention were my bulls, Thor and Mayhem, standing at the far end of the pasture, staring toward the barn. They looked agitated, and for good reason. They didn't like change, and they definitely didn't like strangers. I inhaled sharply, fighting the urge to explode. Karen, you're trespassing. She rolled her eyes. Oh, don't be such a stick in the mud. No one's trespassing. Look, I even have permission. She reached into her purse and pulled out a piece of paper, handing it to me with a smug look. I glanced down and almost laughed. It was a printed Hoa notice sign with a scribbled name that was barely legible. This is not a legal document, I said, shoving it back into her hands. This is garbage. Karen huffed. It's an official HOA approval. I stared at her. Karen, the HOA has no right to give away my barn. Oh, stop making a fuss. Everything's already set up. It's too late to change anything now. I looked at her, then at the guests, then at my bulls. A slow smile spread across my face. Fine, I said. Karen blinked. Excuse me? You're right, I said. It's already set up. I wouldn't want to ruin your daughter's big day. Her lips curled into a satisfied grin. Oh, I'm so glad you see reason, Jack. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to go check on the caterers. I watched her turn and sashay away, her overconfidence practically oozing from every step. I looked back at my bulls, still pacing near the fence, and I made a decision. If Karen wanted a wedding in my barn, she was going to get one. But she was also going to get my bulls. I took my time making my way toward the gate of their enclosure. Thor lifted his head at me, nostrils flaring. Mayhem pawed the ground, already on edge from the disruption to his routine. They were ready, and I was ready. Karen had made a mistake. A big one. I unlatched the gate. Then I whispered, just loud enough for them to hear, "Go introduce yourselves to the wedding guests." And with that, I stepped back and watched the chaos begin. The wedding was in full swing. Guests were seated, sipping champagne, and chirping about the extravagant setup, the floral arrangements, the silk-draped chairs, and the ridiculous ice sculpture of Tiffany and her fiancé locked in a frozen embrace. We're all perfect. Too perfect. Everything about this scene screamed entitlement. Karen was in her element, floating from guest to guest, bragging about how she'd secured the most stunning rustic venue in town. She made sure to drop my name in conversation, as if I'd been some eager participant in her grand scheme. Every now and then, she shot me a triumphant smirk, as if she'd won. I smiled back at her, but she had no idea what was coming. The music started, signaling the ceremony was about to begin. The guests turned their attention to the makeshift aisle as Tiffany made her entrance. She walked with all the grace of a celebrity on a red carpet, her designer wedding dress trailing behind her like a symbol of pure privilege. The moment was picture perfect. People pulled out their phones, whispering about how beautiful she looked. Even I had to admit it was going well to well. I leaned casually against the barn door, watching, waiting. And then, as the priest cleared his throat to begin the vows, I heard it. The sound I'd been waiting for. A low, rumbling snort. A heavy stomp against the dirt. The shifting of powerful muscle as to very large, very irritable bulls realized something was happening inside their barn. The first shriek came from an older woman in the front row, who turned her head just in time to see Thor and Mayhem charging straight toward the ceremony. At first, the guests thought it was part of some elaborate wedding entertainment. A few people even clapped. Then Thor let out a deep, guttural bellow, and Mayhem, true to his name, knocked over the champagne tower with one casual swing of his massive head. Panic rippled through the crowd in slow motion. The bride gasped, clutching her chest as if she were about to faint. The groom took a hesitant step back, his eyes darting between the bulls and his future mother-in-law, as if unsure who posed the bigger threat. The priest, to his credit, attempted to keep going, holding onto his Bible as if it could protect him from the 2-ton forces of nature, now barreling through the reception. Then came the screaming. Chairs flipped, glasses shattered. A woman in heels attempted to run, only to twist her ankle and collapse into the wedding cake, her flailing arms sending the top tier flying into the air. It landed squarely on the groom's mother, who let out an unholy screech that was immediately drowned out by the stampede of panicked guests, fleeing for their lives. Karen stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. She tried to bark orders, waving her arms as if she could control the chaos. But no one was listening. People were too busy scrambling up onto tables, tripping over decorations, and diving into bushes in desperate attempts to escape. Tiffany's shriek cut through the madness as she lifted the hem of her $1,000 dress and attempted to run. Unfortunately for her, the layers of lace and tulle were not designed for quick movement. She barely made it 2 steps before her heel caught on the fabric, sending her tumbling forward. She landed face first into a decorative punch bowl, emerging seconds later dripping red liquid from head to toe. resembling something out of a low-budget horror film. Her groom, in an impressive display of self-preservation, had already abandoned her, sprinting toward the parking lot without so much as a glance back. Thor, having thoroughly enjoyed flipping over tables, turned his attention to the buffet. With one swift motion, he sent the roast beef platter soaring, splattering half the guests with gravy. Meanwhile, Mayhem, true to his name, had locked eyes with the wedding band, who had made the unfortunate decision of staying put, instruments in hand. The lead singer tried to keep his composure, attempting a shaky rendition of a love song as a form of distraction. It didn't work. Mayhem snorted and charged. The drummer let out a strangled yelp and abandoned his kit entirely, diving onto the roof of the barn in a desperate attempt to escape. The rest of the band followed, scrambling for safety as their expensive instruments were trampled beneath Mayhem's powerful hooves. Karen, realizing her perfect wedding was now in complete ruins, turned toward me, fury blazing in her eyes. She stomped through the chaos, dodging overturned tables and fleeing guests. Her dress now stained with an unfortunate mixture of cake frosting and what I suspected was wine. "You," she screeched, jabbing a perfectly manicured finger at my chest. "You did this?" I crossed my arms and raised an eyebrow. "Did what?" "I don't control the bulls." "You let them out on purpose," she accused, her voice reaching levels only dogs could hear. I shrugged. "I was just tending to my farm animals, Karen. It's not my fault they got curious." She let out a noise that sounded somewhere between a growl and a sob, her rage boiling over. "You're going to pay for this. The damages, the emotional distress, everything. I'll sue you." I smiled, pulling my phone out of my pocket. "Actually, Karen, I was thinking of pressing charges myself. Trespassing, destruction of property, unauthorized use of my land. I think the police would love to hear about this." Her eyes widened, her bravado flickering. "You wouldn't dare." I turned my phone screen toward her. It was already recording, capturing every second of the chaos. Her precious guests running for their lives, Tiffany wailing in the background, her groom hiding behind a tree, and most importantly, Karen herself admitting that she had taken over my barn without permission. "Try me," I said, smirking for the first time since this whole ordeal began. Karen looked genuinely afraid. She opened her mouth, probably to issue some weak excuse, but before she could speak, Mayhem, seemingly bored with the destruction of the wedding, turned his attention to us. With a satisfied snort, he lowered his head and charged. Karen barely had time to scream before she was forced to dive headfirst into the decorative wedding fountain to avoid getting run over. The freezing water splashed in all directions as she surfaced with a gasp, sputtering and flailing like a fish out of water. I could have walked away then. I could have left her there, soaked, humiliated, and defeated. But instead, I leaned over the fountain, looking down at her. "Hope you enjoyed the venue," I said, "because this is the last event you'll ever have here." Then, with a satisfied nod, I turned and walked away, leaving Karen dripping, fuming, and utterly speechless in the ruins of her perfect wedding. The guests were still running. Some were sprinting toward their cars, frantically yanking at their locked doors while fumbling with keys. Others had given up entirely, choosing to hide behind bushes or jump fences in a desperate attempt to escape. The once elegant wedding setup now looked like the aftermath of a tornado. Tables overturned, plates shattered, flowers scattered across the ground, and an entire roast beef platter lay half-eaten in the dirt thanks to Thor. The massive ice sculpture of Tiffany and her now missing groom had toppled over, the bride's frozen face lying sideways in a pool of melted water, her glassy stare looking as lifeless as the real Tiffany, who was still sitting on the ground covered in punch, silently processing the destruction of her perfect day. The groom, as expected, had completely disappeared. Last I saw, he was vaulting over the fence like his life depended on it. The coward had abandoned ship the moment things went south, leaving his bride to deal with the mess alone. Judging by the look on Tiffany's face, she was realizing that this might be a pattern for him. Meanwhile, her mother was still struggling to get out of the wedding fountain, her drenched designer dress clinging to her like a sad, defeated flag. Karen flailed, sending waves of water spilling over the sides as she tried to heave herself up. But the slippery stone edge made it impossible. I could see the fury burning in her eyes, a silent promise that she would find a way to make me suffer for this. Unfortunately for her, I wasn't the one about to be held responsible for the destruction. The Hoa didn't own my barn. The wedding had been held here under false pretenses. That meant any fines, lawsuits, or damages would fall squarely on her shoulders. The first sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder as they approached. It seemed someone had finally called the police. Likely one of the terrified guests who assumed the bulls had been part of some elaborate murder plot. I watched as the patrol cars pulled up, kicking up dust as they came to a stop. Officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts, surveying the scene in stunned silence. One of them looked at the wedding carnage, then at the soaking wet woman still splashing around in the fountain, then at me. Standing calmly by the barn door, one of the officers, a man named Deputy Owens, who I'd known for years, adjusted his hat and let out a long sigh. "Jack," he said, his voice laced with exhaustion. "What the hell happened here?" I took my time pulling out my phone and flipping to the video I had recorded earlier. Without saying a word, I hit play and let him watch as Karen admitted on camera that she had taken over my barn. Without permission, the footage captured everything: her smug attitude, her complete disregard for my objections, and her arrogant dismissal of the idea that she had done anything wrong. Then, of course, the video showed the exact moment the bulls entered the scene, followed by the absolute chaos that unfolded. When the video ended, Owens ran a hand down his face, shaking his head. "So let me get this straight," he said, looking at Karen. "You threw a wedding on private property without permission?" Karen, still dripping wet, attempted to regain her composure. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin, and attempted to speak with authority. "This is a misunderstanding," she declared. "I had full approval from the HOA. Owens turned back to me. "Does the Hoa have any actual legal authority over your land?" "No," I said, crossing my arms. "And even if they did, this was never an Hoa decision. This was Karen making up her own rules." Karen let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Jack is just being dramatic. No harm was done." Owens slowly looked around at the wreckage, the destroyed decorations, the overturned food tables, the terrified guests still shaking in the distance. Then he looked at the band, who were still perched on the barn roof, refusing to come down. His gaze finally landed on Tiffany, who sat motionless in her ruined dress, staring blankly into the distance, completely unresponsive. "No harm," Owens repeated, his voice carrying the weight of disbelief. "Lady, this looks like a damn battlefield." Karen scoffed. "Oh, please. This is just a minor incident. Jack should be the one in trouble. He let those bulls loose on purpose." Owens turned back to me. "That true?" I shrugged. "Bulls have minds of their own. All I did was open a gate." Owens pinched the bridge of his nose, muttering something under his breath before turning back to Karen. "Well, you're going to have to come with us." Karen's face twisted in outrage. "Excuse me. You trespassed. You hosted an unauthorized event on private property, and you caused significant damages," Owens said, pulling out his notepad. "And that's before we even get into the falsified Hoa documents." Karen turned to her guests for support, but they were all either pretending not to know her or too busy licking their wounds to care. Even Tiffany, her own daughter, didn't bother defending her. She was still staring at the ground, whispering something about signs from the universe and cosmic warnings. Owens motioned for another officer to take Karen to the squad car. She let out an indignant shriek, trying to shake off the officer's grip. "You can't do this. This is harassment. I know my rights. I am the Hoa president." The officer opened the car door. "You have the right to remain silent." Karen tried to argue, but it was too late. The door shut behind her, and she was officially out of my life, at least for now. The guests wasted no time disappearing. Those who hadn't already fled took this as their cue to leave, making hurried excuses and avoiding eye contact. Tiffany sat for a while longer, her ruined wedding playing in her head like a tragic movie scene. Eventually, she let out a deep sigh, stood up, and without a word walked barefoot toward the road. her once beautiful dress dragging behind her in the dirt. I wasn't sure where she was going, and I didn't really care. As the last of the wedding chaos faded, I turned my attention back to my barn. It was a mess, but nothing that couldn't be fixed. The decorations, the chairs, the leftover catering trays, none of it belonged here. It was time to reclaim my space. Thor and Mayhem, now bored with the excitement, wandered back toward their enclosure. Their work done, I patted Thor on the side as he passed. "Good job, buddy," I said. "You earned an extra meal tonight." A few days later, I uploaded the footage online. It didn't take long for it to go viral. The video of Karen getting chased by bulls, diving into a fountain, and ultimately getting arrested became an instant internet sensation. News outlets picked it up, influencers reacted to it, and even late-night talk show hosts made jokes about the infamous barn wedding disaster. I didn't just get justice. I got entertainment. And better yet, I got peace. Karen, after the public embarrassment and legal trouble, quietly stepped down from her HOA position. No more fines for rugged truck parking. No more unnecessary rules. Just quiet, uninterrupted farm life exactly how I liked it. As I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sunset, I lifted my glass in a silent toast to Thor and Mayhem. They had done their job well, and best of all, the Hoa would never mess with me again.